Don't touch that.
Okay, there we go.
We
Okay.
need to, oh, okay. So where's the slideshow? Oh.
Just hit F4.
Is that okay? Can you see?
Yes.
Oh, it's wonderful.
All right, good.
Excellent.
All right, I'm going to change my tune for the first part. It's not going to say what I said initially. I was ad-libbing. So we're familiar with scenes like this. Is everybody happy?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm going to dedicate this to Bob McDonald. It seems
nice.
appropriate. We're familiar with scenes like this in Nova Scotia woodlands, but we actually see these plants. They are kind of background noise, as I've always described them. So what are mosses? Actually, an umbrella term, Bryophytes, includes mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, though the latter two evolved at different times in geological history. The liverworts are actually older. Its unambiguous fossils have been found in the Upper Carboniferous period, but we know from molecular work that mosses date back to the Ordovician period, more than 400 million years ago. And they are survivors, there's no question about it. I am also continually amazed by mosses. They will grow into the smallest cracks and spread and produce a covering in a fairly short time, something that is totally barren as long as it isn't being disrupted. So let me see now, where do I go from here? Eric? Oh, there we are. That's it, good. I'm not using my own laptop, it's Eric's. It's much better than mine. And mosses showed up in the literature in the 1500s, but even then, only one moss was described, and it was Polytrichum commune, or one of the haircap mosses. And it is classic because every textbook has it as an example of the life cycle. The photographs of it and the labeling of it all refer to Polytrichum commune. They look like little trees in a forest when you see them in the wild. And some of you will be quite familiar with it. These are common mosses. I'm not showing you anything really that you're not going to see when you go out in the woods. And the first book written, to be written on mosses, was by Johann Jakob Dillenius in 1741, and it was called Historia Muscorum. And it was not until the mid 1800s, so here, this is quite, 100 years later, that people began to collect and study the mosses. And they were easy to collect dry and rehydrate for identification. And for the first time, were disconnected from potential medicinal uses. And that's why plants were studied, mainly, because botanists were also the physicians of the district in which they lived. So they were the ones who got the potions, who made the medicines for their patients. And they became, at that time, that was in the mid 1800s, suddenly they were of interest to people, and not for medicinal purposes, but for their own sake and interest. And it's just a very crowded group of Polytrichum commune that we have on our property. So now the parts, and part of this is, it's going to sound a bit like a lecture, but that's partly because I've had a couple of people say to me, can you do something about explaining the parts and what they mean and what they are as you walk, when you're walking through the woods, you're looking out for things. How can I tell what I'm looking at? So the parts of, this is Polytrichum again. I went out and picked one. This one, why I would duplicate this is that this is when it's in a dry state. If you put a little bit of water in your hand and you put this in it, this is what it becomes. it almost immediately will start to move out into its moist form, and it will begin to photosynthesize immediately. So here you have a stem. You have the leaves come out from here. And then you have rhizoids, which are along here. So they don't have true roots. And the leaves are different in that they don't have a waxy cuticle like the vascular plants do. And they're really only one cell thick. That means that water and nutrients can diffuse passively back and forth from the plant. So they're really dependent on moisture to exist. But interestingly, and this is a bit of a digression, about 2 years ago, I noticed a rock in a place where I walk my daughter's dogs that was covered in Hypnum imponens, one of the mat forming mosses. So I was intrigued by it, and I took a chunk of it, quite a big chunk of it, and I put it on a rock at our back door. It's been there for 2 years. It gets dried out, it rains, or I throw water on it, and it turns green. And this year I took it out to the top of the septic, like concrete septic, and I put it there. And I looked there tonight when I went down to the garden, and it was bright green. And I think I'm going to start taking photographs of it, because this thing has it just simply allowed itself just to live on these depauperate conditions, under these depauperate conditions, with no help from me whatsoever. So they really are survivors. So the rhizoids then are not roots. They are simply anchors to the substratum in which they live. Spores. All right, now here's another, and I will go through this actually next time, but I'll just mention it briefly here. From here to the top is the sporophyte. It has chromosomes in its cells from the mother and from the father. From here, where is this? From here down to where it's planted in the substratum, one set of chromosomes. And this is unique in the plant world. All other plants have 2 sets of chromosomes. The grasses you walk on, the shrubs that you're looking at, you grow in your garden, or the wildflowers that you come across, they're all diploid. In other words, they have 2 sets of chromosomes. So these are unique in that the dominant plant that you walk on in the forest has only 1 set of chromosomes, which is very interesting. So up here, spores form, and I'll explain that a little bit after as well. This is what they look like. And each one of these spores, once it's released, when they dry out, and they go through a reduction division in chromosomes, fall on the ground, and are capable of growing into a brand new plant like this. It's quite remarkable. The other interesting thing is that those spores aren't born in the sporophyte with a labeled female or male cell. So I don't know that anybody knows exactly how they do this, but they obviously have a choice, and it's chemically determined. Anyway, so the next one. So these are just simply a reiteration of what I said a minute ago. They lack that waxy cuticle, so they don't need to have an internal support system or a water and nutrient delivery system. They just simply use simple diffusion. And they can't grow very, very tall, but grow in close contact for support. Now you can decide as you walk in the woods, you can easily separate for the first stage of identification by deciding whether it's a cushion or a creeping mat. Cushions like, well, actually like, well, like Polytrichum, have the spore cap, the sporophyte, the spore-bearing plant, growing from the tip end of the stem, whereas pleurocarps, if you think of a flat stem with leaves along it that is prostrate rather than upright, those pleurocarps can produce sporophytes all along the stem. And I haven't got a picture of that. That would be useful. All right, and this is an example of the two. This is Polytrichum piliferum, and the piliferum refers to some to hairs, light hairs, hyaline points on the leaves, because it grows in. You can see it growing in a rocky zone. Actually, this is on Digby Neck that I took these photographs, and these are the sporophytes with their fuzzy coverings as well, which are interesting. This one is the mat forming one. This is a brachythecium, and I'm not trying to impress you by names, scientific names. It's just that I can't be bothered to learn the common names, and they're all different, and they may be absolutely incorrect. So I stick with so in England or in Scotland or in France or Western United States, if I say brachythecium, then that is that easy to go to the key to look for it, that brachythecium. But if you say rose, bad hair day moss, for example, you don't know what to look for. Okay, this is an example of a moss plant. It's called Neum hornum, and it grows separate. It has separate male and female plants, but they all grow together so that the sperm, which is motile, can move in a droplet of water or in wet surface from the male plant to the female plant. The female plant is tucked. The structure is in the tip end of the stem, and it makes its way to it. It's more often than not, it's very likely it's chemical detection. So I'm just reiterating here that the moss plants you walk on in the forest have one set of chromosomes, and these are called gametophytes. And the sperm cells are motile. They can dry out in times of drought and then rehydrate quickly. And they originated in the Devonian period, about 450 million years ago, directly from the algal line. Where are they found? Just about everywhere except in seawater. And there are some that Eulota, there are 4 species of Eulota, for example, and I'll show you one of them later in a slide, that only grows in the splash zones along the coast. I'm going to do a lot of this crowding with pictures because I wanted to show as many photographs as possible in different habitats. This was taken at Milford House when we had the Nature Nova Scotia meetings there one time, a few years back. And this roof was just coated with mosses. So they're perfectly happy growing on mosses. And this was very shaded, of course, and very dark, and the photograph's dark. This was taken in Cape Chicanecto Provincial Park. This is Bassania trilobata, which is a liverwort. This is a moss in the front. It's Dicranum scoparium. And then everybody recognizes this. I call it Indian pipe. So these are perfectly happy growing all together. Trees will support a growth of moss as well. And this one is exceptionally high. Most of them just grow from about around here, or even just to these buttress roots. But this one happens to grow quite high. So this has enough moisture and enough moisture to allow it to grow so high. This was taken in, it's very common, Bryum argenteum. It's argenteum meaning silver. And it has hair points on the leaves that protect it from the sun's rays. They tend to grow in very dry places, in sand along sandy beaches, in the dunes, in between concrete slabs, sidewalks, just about anywhere. It's a real weed, but I think it's pretty. It's a really nice moss. This summer not summer, it was the fall, around in October, early October, we went to Seal Island for 5 days. And I was searching out the 3 red maple trees that are growing near the northern part of the island. And I ran across this sneaker. And there it was. I haven't identified the mosses on them yet, but there are at least 2 species. And who knows, there might be liverworts there too. This was taken at Lake Menamkiak in Lunenburg County, quartzite rock, and it's happily growing both liverworts, especially interesting liverworts, and mosses on the rock surface. So they really are very adaptable. Well, why are they important? Well, I guess we've alluded to that. They reduce they recycle nutrients. They reduce leaching of soil nutrients. They retain water in the soil and prevent erosion. And that's something that we need to think about when clear cutting occurs, because it's a very destructive process and everything goes, leaving the soil unprotected. They provide a nursery for native plant seedlings, but they also prevent exotics from sprouting. And there is a chemical component that prevents exotics from being from sprouting in the woods. So that's why you're not seeing dandelions and some of the other nuisance plants that are fine in your lawn, but they really don't belong in the woods. Sphagnum or bog moss, and they regulate the moisture, but forest and wetland disturbances upset this balance, and we all know about that. Now, in general, mosses aren't eaten by animals, but there are some notable exceptions. This is one of the Bathurst herd in Bathurst Inlet, and it feeds on lichens, but also a great deal on mosses in the wintertime. And let me just check my notes here so that I can give you a coherent description. Mosses have in the Arctic, well, there are certain other ones as well, but there's a certain group of mosses that in cold weather produce arachidonic acid, which is a very highly unsaturated fatty acid. And it is thought that ingestion of these mosses during the cold period, especially in the winter when there's no sun, there's no heat, and the animals are walking in snow and cold all the time. Now, I know they have a countercurrent blood system, but there is some evidence that eating these mosses during the cold period keeps their cell membranes fluid rather than seizing up, like putting butter on a piece of ice and you would find it would suddenly be solid. They want to keep those membranes fluid. Okay, let me see. Oh, and migratory Arctic geese are also migratory, returning to the tundra in the spring when the lipid concentrations are highest in the mosses. And those mosses, interesting, later on, when it warms up, they don't produce it anymore. So as long as the temperature is low, the mosses will produce this arachidonic acid. There must be a reason for it. So moss consumption then could then benefit adult birds and also the young, to which in unsaturated fatty acids are transferred via the eggs to the young. And you can imagine a small a chick coming out of the egg. It's cold, and that apparently there is some value in the transfer from the geese, the parent geese, to the egg, and then hence to the small chick inside. And this is just an example, sort of a diversity example. This was the Acacia Valley Trails, Brooke, and Ginny Prue and Ginny and Lisa Prue would be very familiar with this place. I had not been before this year earlier, and I was just captivated by it. It's absolutely beautiful. And we only walked through it. We didn't really do any collecting, and I would like to go back and do that. This is just a complexity of plant life slide that I liked, with the vascular plants that we're all familiar with, and the moss, the sphagnum there as a kind of growth medium in a sense. And then this was taken up the shore towards Owl's Head, where Francis Anderson and I had a look this early in the spring. And we explored some of these bogs as well as the place itself. So the inside story, to some extent, we were on a recent trip with Bob and 6 others it was October, I guess. And, what's this, Anne? What's this, Anne? And I made a mistake with sphagnum, but you can see why, because not everything inside is the same for different species. This one has, this is the whole leaf, and you can see that it's and the outside and the inside have a different arrangement. These little openings here are pores. These are fibrils, which strengthen the cells. It's stained. I do stain them because it's easier to see the details. But these are the chloroplasts. There's no chlorophyll in between. So chlorophyll in here. And so the water runs in. It's highly absorbent. And where does it go? It parks itself, water parks itself in these clear, large cells. And depending on the moss species, some can absorb up to 20, 25 times its weight in fluids. This is Blepharostoma trichofilm, and it's a mouthful, I'm afraid. I don't have a common name for it. But it's a very delicate liverwort. And liverworts, if I would have to hold a piece of a sample up to my eye, and to not my eye, but my hand lens, and search for this, it's very, very tiny. And but it's very distinctive as well. Where's my cursor here? Oh, it's not working. On the top left is actually Funaria hygrometrica, which is the moss, an acrocarp, a cushion moss that grows after a fire. It doesn't like competition. So if there's a fire in the woods or a fire pit where you've had a barbecue or something like that, and then you leave it alone, this will be one of the first mosses. Hence Funaria, as in a funeral pyre, and hygrometrica means that it takes up water very quickly and can grow. Now this isn't a moss at all up here. Those 2 bunny ears are from an insect. It's an insect case for the Heteropteras. And I had never seen that before. That is not mine. I took it off the internet. One of the people from Bryonet put the picture, the photo on, asking for identification. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. So, you know, the mosses don't just behave themselves. They obviously are a site for other things. And this is also a sphagnum. And when you're identifying sphagnum, make a section like this, a very thin section of the leaf, and then you look at the position and the shape of the chlorophyll. So these cells contain chlorophyll, and you notice these large cells in between, and that's where the water is and where the water gets in. And it has nothing else in it except maybe a few organelles, but it's mainly just empty space and can take up water very quickly. Also, another way of identifying is for this particular sphagnum is called fimbriatum, and these the fimbriate part is the way these leaves is very distinctive. This one, this is an easy one to identify because these the edges have been almost looked as if someone has shredded them. So that was stained as well because it just makes it makes it easier for me to photograph it through my microscope. I'm going to go down to this one, Ptillidium pulcherrimum, and I have a photograph. I found it really hard to photograph the actual plant, and I would have liked to have put it over here because when you're looking at this and you saw the whole plant over here, you wouldn't have any idea that they were related at all. Think of a cat's paw with the hairs, the soft fur, the hairs over the foot. It's pretty much what the Ptillidium pulcherrimum looks like. There's a closely related one. It's another species. It's Ptillidium ciliare, and the only difference is that these cilia, this is one leaf, and it's ornamented with these cilia, which gives that cat's paw look about it. The cilia are closer together, and there's much more of them. The last one is my favorite, of course, and I did this section. I was really thrilled with it because this is also a way of defining the species. So there's a certain number across of these towers of cells in the leaf. What I've done here is cut the leaf from the top to the bottom. So this is the underside or the ventral side of the leaf. And this is the outside of the leaf with these little that make up the leaf surface. So it's one of the things that give the stiffness to polytrichum leaves. The other thing is that you might get 30 or 40 of these, depending on the species. And then you would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or maybe a greater number, or maybe a fewer in number of the cells that go up to the surface. And all of those features have to be examined carefully and counted if you want to make an accurate determination. So we're now on to liverworts. So you have bryophytes, which are composed of the mosses. The true bryophytes are mosses, and the other two have separate origins, with the liverworts being the oldest of the three. And I've just put in some pictures that I had taken, and I can't say that I identified them probably. I think I did remember what these were, but I always have trouble with liverworts. I really love them, but I find them difficult to identify. And this is just another one of the Ptillidium pulcherrimum leaves. They're not all red. This one, it just gives me such humor because it looks like, it looks like they're smiling. And you can see the little green, almost pellets inside this open mouth. Those are gemi. And if you shake them out, they will produce more of this. This is called Lunularia cruciata. And I suppose the Lunularia description word refers to the smile. It's one of my favorite liverworts. I don't remember where I took this one, but it's quite amusing. This one is this is the one that I think Lara really has a passion for, Marcantia polymorpha. And this photograph was taken on West Ironbound Island one time when a group of us went over. There's a basement, an abandoned basement, concrete basement from an old house down near the shore. And I happened to look in, I was snooping around, others were all everywhere. And this whole basement floor, this whole floor was covered in Marcantia polymorpha. And this is the female part here. And underneath is where the ovaries are, or I mentioned call it ovary, but it's sort of like that. And then you can see the males over here. But the next slide shows what the males look like. And so this is where the motile sperm originate. But they're also close together. They're in a sheltered basement. There's moisture in there all the time. And you can see right here, almost like little eggs. And these are gemi that can be splashed out with water or an insect walking over it and produce a new plant from it. They're extremely interesting. This one is Noelia curvifolia. It's a liverwort, and it's one of my favorites. It's very tiny, and it colonizes. It's a colonizer, and it colonizes decorticated old logs that are beginning to rot. And of course, decorticated means no bark on it. And then there's this succession of different mosses, and then ultimately vascular plants will take over. And so you get a kind of competition occurring. Also, lichens will also take over. Now, this is not dyed, it's not contrived, it's not color enhanced. It's called Splachnum ampullaceum. And if you look at the sporophytes, they look like ampules. If you can have read about doctors in the old days, they had their potions in a little glass ampule. And this is where that name comes from. This was found, this is not, I have my first photograph, the first time I found it was in Cape Chignecto Provincial Park, but this was taken in Maine at a very special bog that I've been to a couple of times when taking classes there in the north of Maine. And it was growing on the edge of a lag, which is the wet area on the rim, the perimeter of a bog. And once you can cross that, and then you get into the bog, it's much drier and easier walking, but it's getting across this moat. And that's where this was growing. And what's special about this is that it has to have moose dung in order to propagate. And how does it get from the moose dung to the next patch of moose dung? By flies. Flies will crawl over it because it's stinky, and the spores get caught on the insect's body, and then that rubs off onto the next patch of moose dung, and then you start the cycle again. Mosses. Well, what do we say about mosses? There's lots of them. A lot more than liverworts. Pleurozium schrieberi, the red-stemmed moss. Now there's a common name that I do use. And this was a photograph I took many years ago, and I liked it because it was just a little bit damp, and it showed the red stem in the center extremely well, and I didn't have a shaky hand then. So it's one of my favorite photographs. However, when we were on our, recently I took the Nova Scotia Community College group of students to a site off Route 308 outside of Bridgewater. And we were picking up Pleuroseum. And they said, well, what's this? And I said, well, scrape off the leaves on the stem and tell me what color the stem is. Oh, it's red. Yes. That if you're any doubt that what you've taken is unidentifiable, scrape off that center stem, the center part of the stem, because some of them are very heavily leafed, and you'll be able to make an accurate identification. There's, again, this isn't here, but we have all these species here, and I confess that I forget what this one is, but this is Flavocommans, and this is rubellum moss. This was in Maine when I was taking a course on bog mosses, and one of the participants gathered up this bouquet of colors, and we all rushed over and took photographs of it. I just think it's beautiful. It just tells you that it's not just all green stuff out there, that there is an awful lot of color. The red is protective against the sun's rays, and the same thing with the yellow. And often you'll find that the green mosses will have, as in Stagnum capillifolium, they will be different colors. So you'll find them as green, then they're pink, and then they can be quite red as well, depending on the exposure to sun. Princess Plume moss is a lovely moss, and I always look out for it. It's not rare, but you don't go looking for it, you find it. And it looks just like that. It looks like the princess plume of feather that the princes often wore in their hats. And what I've done here is if you're looking at this moss, you'll say, yeah, what's that? It's around the tree, and it's kind of different. And so I reached down and I pulled this up, and there is a reason that it has been called stair-step moss. For each of these whorls represents a year of growth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 represents 9 years of growth. As a moss is growing, you know, it almost looks like this all the time, year upon year upon year. It spreads, yes. But what happens is that the new growth is up here, and the old growth gets lower and lower and lower into the substratum that it's growing in. So these are the sorts of things that if you're a beginner, or if you're just interested, or you want to curious about it, pull them apart. Get your microscope out, not your microscope, your hand lens out when you're in the field, and have a look. Look at it up closely, observe the details. And this is just a close-up of that same moss. This is brocade moss. And again, I do have a repertoire of about 6 or 7 mosses that I do know the common names of. But this has lost its color because it's a winter. I took this photograph in Briar Island many years ago, and I love this golden rusty color that it becomes because it loses chlorophyll in the wintertime. And it's also a moss that is very hardy, and it will it'll be exposed to the elements. And so lost its chlorophyll to deal with a harsh winter. And then it'll turn green again in the spring. It's called Hypnum imponens. And this was taken at Milford House a number of years ago. I have much better photographs than this, but I like the idea of the setting. It was just the moss. It's got the lake in behind, the forest beyond, and this tree that is coated in Necra pinnata. And I remember that the easy way to remember Necra pinnata is it has these flat leaves, but they branch out almost as if there were palms out from a tree, from the tree itself. And I remember it because it sometimes grows around the tree as a necklace. So Necra pinnata means flat. So these flat leafed structures come out, and they often are associated with a lichen, not a lichen, a liverwort called Porella platyphylla. And more often than not, now I'm not sure I'm not exactly sure whether it's here, but it's more often than not below the main plant. And this is one of the eulotus this is the common one. And this is what it looks like on the tree, these cushions. And they almost always have sporophytes. They're colonizers. Anything that produces a lot of sporophytes all the time is a colonizer. It just wants to grow and reproduce as much as possible. And the key for this one is that it has ridges along the sporophyte. It starts out looking like this with all these fuzzy hairs, which are presumably protection of some sort. Excuse me. Up until recently, it was called Eulota crispa, but now with the chemistry of looking at the DNA, they decided that it is not Eulota crispa, but Eulota medium. I have to sometime soon do some reading up on this to see why it had to be changed. However, it's a fairly easy one. There are 4 species of Eulota in Nova Scotia. There are 2 that grow on rocks, and they are attached directly to the rocks with rhizoids. And there are 2 that, there's one that grows on the splash zone along the ocean side. And then there's what was the other one? Can't remember. Oh, yes, the other one is also on a rock called Eulota hutchinsii. But it just has a different gestalt than this one. And it has, the leaves are strong. Oh, and Coarctata as well, which has pear-shaped sporophytes. So they're relatively easy to identify by the beginners. Mother-in-law's cushion. It's a spongy, light-colored moss. This photograph was taken on our property, Leucobrium glaucum, and it's leucistic. In other words, it's not albino white, but it's a greeny white. And glaucum also means white. And it's white because, here's a better picture. If you can roll your tongue, consider that in the inside of your tongue, in that rolled part, are located chloroplasts. The outside are empty cells, as I was showing you in the sphagnum earlier on. And this is a moss this is a cushion moss, so it's an acrocarp, and it can take up enormous amounts of water and be perfectly happy in a drought. They don't shrivel up, they just simply sit there. And if you put your finger down in the middle of it, you'll find it's moist. So mother-in-law's cushion, as my mother-in-law said, you know, that's called a mother-in-law's cushion because if you invite your mother-in-law out into the woods and she needs to sit down to rest, find a cushion and she will get a red bottom. So this is, I think I've missed a whole bunch of stuff as we went along, but that it doesn't matter. During the First World War, sphagnum became the surgical dressing for the soldiers who were wounded on the battlefield. And Chesley Allen from Yarmouth County searched for sphagnum moss of suitable quality for dressings over a period of 7 weeks between July and September 1917. And the moss had to be of high quality absorbance. So it must have had to have something on the order of 20 to 25 times, be able to absorb 20 to 25 times its weight in fluids. It also has had a little bit of a antibiotic effect. So these mosses were gathered, they were washed, and they were put in cotton pads, which would then be put on the wound so that the soldier could be brought from the battlefield to the field hospital. This only happened during the First War. By the Second War, people, I guess the medical people, were not enamored with using stuff from a bog to put on wounds. And so they made cotton pads, which didn't absorb nearly as much moisture, i.e. in blood and body fluids, as did the sphagnum. And certainly it's, I have used it. I've scratched myself in the woods with running into a branch, and sufficiently that I would have to just go and take a handful of sphagnum and put it around it till I got home and put a bandage on it and washed it. And I had never had any trouble with that, with impurities in it. It's a very handy little tool to know when you're getting out. As a result of Mr. Allen's careful work, even with school children, the papillosum, which is the star of the sphagnum and the star in the sphagnum world, many bags of this moss were sent overseas to the war effort. And maybe in a sense, it was a good thing that we didn't, this is not sphagnum, the picture is not a sphagnum papillosum, it's another one, but it gives you some idea of how robust papillosum was to be able to be used in wartime. Now, the other thing you can do if you're interested in taking a moss workshop, and this was one from a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, and Dave Patricon will certainly recognize some of the people here. And Eric is down in the corner on his hands and knees. Donna Crossland is there, Harold Clapp, and I don't know who the young man is beside Dave, but we had about, I think, 8 or 10 people take the course in over a 3-day period. And the last day I thought, well, what can I do that might be interesting for them to use their knowledge? So I had made these quadrats that were only 50 centimeters. They weren't meter squares. And I threw down randomly on this little place where trucks would turn around. It was just a small pad, gravel pad. And I threw it down, and there was something growing in here that I hadn't seen before. And it's called bug on a stick. This is very tiny. It's called Boxbaumia aphylla. A means without, and phylla means leaf. It's got no leaves. It just has this cute little sporophyte that pops out of there. I got down on my hands and knees, and I spotted this right in the corner where Eric was looking down here. And it was right in here. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so thrilled. I jumped up and said, everybody, come in, come on, come and see this. This is amazing. Anyway, that's what it was. So don't be afraid to get down on your hands and knees. That I'm looking at Hedwigia ciliata, which grows again attached to rock on the Aspotogan Peninsula on this outcrop. It's just astonishing. The lichens in between, and then this whole area just covered in Hedwigia ciliata. And it looks kind of white because it has these hyaline points on the moss that protect it from the heat of the summer and also the sunshine. It lives in a very dry and inhospitable environment. I went back several years later when I had a request to collect Hedwigia, different clumps of Hedwigia that had to be at least 12 meters apart. And I collected here, but I must say that it had built up, unfortunately, and trucks had been driving over it. So a lot of this was lost, but it was still there on the fringes. And so I was happy that that was the case. But this is what you have to do. You can't just stand up and look down. You have to get down on your hands and knees. Now, I should go back and see what I was supposed to say about some of these things. This is the sleeping goddess of Heligan Gardens in Cornwall, UK. Now, let me get my notes here. Where did this go? This sleeping goddess of Heligan Gardens in Cornwall is in a 1,000 acre estate that belonged to the Tremaine family for over 400 years. And then went unattended when the workers at the estate went off to the war. And I assume that it was the first war. And then it was abandoned, and the estate was abandoned. The people didn't come back to work on it. And it was rediscovered. It wasn't rediscovered until 1990. And now it's quite a tourist attraction. But what I liked about it was this model lying on the ground, covered in moss, with a little tuft of hair at this point of grass. I just think it's lovely. And that's the end of it. Let me just see what I missed. I don't think I missed too much. No. Anybody, any questions? Silence. Everybody's gone to bed.
So
Mary-
Anne, that sleeping model is not 400 years old, is it?
But that I don't know,
Oh,
but it had
Very
been there a
intriguing.
long time.
yeah. Beautiful.
Anne, it's Mary McCauley here. I just want to thank you. I've been asking you for years to do your moss presentation, and I was not disappointed. I learned so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Mary. It was a bit helter-skelter, but part of the reason this week, or in fact, for a couple of weeks now, I realized just how awful my slide collection is. It really is just everywhere. And we go somewhere and I take photographs, and then I don't find time to label them and put them into a proper folder. And so I'm really going to have to do something about it. And that's what took me so long to put this together. And I kept thinking, oh, I've got to put this in, and oh, they'll enjoy this one. And so it really grew like Topsy. And I hope it wasn't terribly or just so disorganized you wanted to go to sleep instead. Anyway.
It was fascinating. Thank you very, very much. And it was a great example to the rest of us on how to do an entertaining presentation while also teaching us something. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Is
Hmm?
there a bookend on Nova Scotia mosses? Like we have Nova Scotia birds and Nova Scotia trees. Is there a book on Nova Scotia mosses?
No, but there is one that was produced, I think it was about 8 or 10 years ago by someone by the name of Ralph Pope, who had spent some time in Canada as well. He's from Maine, which is very similar to Nova Scotia. And mosses, of course, exist. There's the eastern ones, and there's the northern ones, and there's the western ones. But he has written this book that is quite remarkable. It's not, oh, good, excellent, Beth. Mosses and liverworts and hornworts. You can look it up. It's a good field notebook, field book to have. And you know, I wouldn't have the courage. Francis Anderson has put together a really lovely lichen book for beginners. It doesn't require a lot of excitement in terms of having to learn a lot. You can just open the book, and Beth Sheila has got that one as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But the Ralph Pope book is really the one to go to. And it has both liverworts and mosses in it.
That's great. Thank you, Anne. I'll just follow up now. My question was going to be, what book or books would you recommend for a beginner?
That one.
Any others? Any others?
Well, there's also another one, but it's only for liverworts. And it costs about $15. It's in black and white, wonderful art illustrations, line drawings, really. It's very disorganized. How they put it together like this, I'll never know. But once you get used to it, I find it really useful. And then I can go to the more complex books to check out what I've identified. And I can get you the name of that and the locate. You can buy it from University of, oh dear, it's in Ontario. Anyway, and I can let you know what it is. Okay.
Well, Anne recommended the Pope book for me when I became interested in mosses and liverworts just a few years ago. And I have found it an invaluable aid as a beginner because it's set out very methodically. The photographs are absolutely brilliant. I don't know if you can see. And the language is a nice combination of layman's terms and scientific terms to introduce a beginner like myself to the wonderful world of mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So yeah, Jeff, you wanted to know about this one? I found it great. And I think that you would too, to be very honest. And you should take a commission on this.
Yes, well, I've recommended it to a lot of people, and a lot of people have bought it. One thing I didn't mention, one time when Francis and I and Tom Neely and a group of people you all probably know, went to down the French shore. And we stayed at a motel that was there. And he gave up the area where they would normally have tables for people to eat breakfast to us. So we could put our microscopes there, come back from the field and set up and identify things. And he was talking to Francis about the lichens and so on. And then he said, and what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm looking at mosses and they're different species. And he said, you mean there's not just one? And I said, no, there's a lot more than one. I said, in fact, in Nova Scotia, well, in the Maritimes, there are approximately, and I know this number has gone up, 384 different species. In all of North America, between 6,000 and 8,000, depending on what book you read and the paper you read. And worldwide, somewhere between 20 and 24,000 different species of mosses. So you can see the extent of it. It's a very diverse group. It's one of the most diverse groups of plants on Earth.
And if I wanted to go out and find hornworts, where would I look? What sort of habitat?
Well, one place where Tom Neely has been working, and I've known about this, those are called arables, and they are usually in the edges of farmers' fields, cornfields that have gone fallow for a number of years, and hornworts will come out there. And Tom actually has found some new species.
Oh.
I haven't seen them, and quite frankly, I have not seen a live hornwort in the field. I've seen them in the lab that the instructor has brought and set them up under the microscope, but I've never found one myself. I find, but from the photographs, what you see, they almost look like lichens. You know, those horn lichens that you see, and they're very similar to that, but they're small, and you really have to have a special eye.
And thank you for the Markentia pictures.
Oh, thanks, Clara.
I had a question for you, Anne, about the nutrient absorption. So my understanding, the rhizoids, is there any nutrient absorption through rhizoids, or is it all through the leaves?
It's through the whole plant.
Okay, so any part of the plant, it'll absorb,
Yep.
I guess, so it absorbs water, absorbs nutrients, eh? Yeah,
Yep, it's just passive diffusion.
okay.
And that's why there's so simple construction in terms of the cells being single cells, single celled thick in a sense. Although that I'm not sure I'm using the wording correctly there, but their anatomy is really useful to the plant in terms of just putting it in water, say, rain comes down and it just gets absorbed.
So it wouldn't, but there's no real nutrient absorption from the substrate below it, right? It's just really rainwater?
Essentially, yes. But that there are substrates that provide like acidic ones. And there are certain mosses that will grow on carbonate. What's the word I want there? The
Organic materials, or?
well, yeah. My brain's not working.
Calcareous rocks?
Yes, calcareous rocks.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, yes.
And you get some species that won't grow anywhere else.
Hmm.
So that the
Sensitive to
substrate,
the pH, maybe, yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
is a dissection microscope adequate for looking at mosses or not?
Well, it's quite adequate. But the only thing, Dave, is that when you get to the point where you need to look inside a leaf,
Yeah.
that's when you need a compound microscope.
Yeah.
Or a cross section. You know, those sections that I made,
Yeah.
I made those under the dissecting scope, and I put it on a slide on the compound microscope. And I have an adapter, a light Schwetzlar adapter that I put into the ocular of the microscope on the left side.
Yeah.
And then I can take photographs with my camera.
And
Yes.
you see a lot of plants, angiosperms and gymnosperms, for example, with a lot of insect damage, or mushrooms with the insect and slug damage and stuff. But mosses, for some reason, maybe I haven't looked hard enough, but they don't seem to be bothered very much by insects. Is that just a false impression of mine, or is that, or is there any truth to that? And if so, do
Yes.
you know why?
I think it's the chemical nature of within the moss that it is unpalatable and rather hard to digest.
Mhm.
You're right. You don't find much insect damage.
You
Maybe,
don't? Okay.
maybe a little bit with slugs, but not much. And well, the parts of that they eat are the fatty parts, or the high lipid part, which would be in the sporophyte, where the spores are full of lipids. So that they'll eat those, but not necessarily the main gametophyte.
Okay. Interesting.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Welcome.
In honor of the 3 days of rain or more, I made the effort to get up on a ladder and clean out the debris on top of the leaf shield in my gutter. In the process, there were very many lovely clumps of mosses that are now sitting on the ground, which I will now have to go and rescue after the weather and properly place in my woods.
I know the same thing happened to us last year. We hadn't touched our eaves troughs for years. And so I got up and did the storage shed, and Eric helped me with my lab because it's much too high for me to get up on a ladder. And he found great clumps of it. It was huge. I did the same thing. He threw them down, and I took photographs of them, but I didn't. Some of them were pollios, but yes, you're quite right. This is very interesting, Rosalind.
They were lovely, just not in my gutter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about these mosses on your roof or whatever, and like in odd places like that. And I hadn't thought about before. Are there like as with so many insects, so many vascular plants, are there invasive mosses that are not from North America that have come here that or just is there any of that in the landscape?
Not really. You have mosses that will grow on your garden, and people feel that's a sign of acidity and they get rid of them. But no, they don't seem to be invasive ones. A lot of these mosses are naturalized, and they came here from Europe. It's not unusual. One moss that grows everywhere is Stratodon purpureus, which is the only moss that is found all over the world. And it originated, I believe, in Europe. And there are quite a few others that are like that are not. Many of them were brought over in with loads of materials from the UK and from other parts of, probably Japan and China and places like that. And those would be Western ones. And there certainly are mosses that grow, species that grow on the West Coast that do not show up here in Nova Scotia or on the East Coast. Yeah, it's interesting because, you would think that they would be able to adapt just about anywhere, but there are certain conditions of growth and moisture, location, nutrients, and the climate will make a difference as well.
So are we going to have a field trip about mosses next year?
Well, I have to learn them better. I had a bit of a hiatus this summer. I gave into my garden and the driveway and painting and all those outdoor things. But I would like to get back to it again. Yeah, sure.
Does elevation play a role in mosses thriving?
Say that again, Beth?
Elevation. Does elevation play a
Yeah.
role?
Yes, yes. Because although mountains are a good place for mosses to grow, there is a certain elevation where they just simply can't because of the extreme. It's a very extreme environment in which to live. Yes, there is a cutoff point.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm.
I don't know, last Saturday, a week ago, when it was sunny and 16 degrees, I was able to take advantage of the little trek through a little sand barren up in Aylesford with Nick Hill. It was
Oh,
sponsored
lovely.
by the Clean Annapolis River Group.
Oh, yes.
It was fascinating, and I think what I found most interesting about it was the coring that was going on. In my garden, you couldn't get down 2 inches without hitting a rock, but he was going down, 18 inches, 24 inches, and bringing out all these sand cores, and it was really fascinating. Things that I had no ideas about the makeup of sand barrens and the plant material in those sand barrens. It was very good.
Yes, I went to one of the meetings. I think it was the first meeting of those sand barrens, but nothing ever really came of it. I was fascinated by because it must have been part of the inland sea. Was that? Did he mention that?
He spoke a lot of. There was a lot of information that some of it went over my head, but there was discussion about why is this sand in this part of the core quite white or gray, and why is this particular part very red, and why is this whole core all the same color? So all the same color was an area that had been cultivated, whereas in the undisturbed areas there were such different layers, and they were distinctly, differentiated. So there has to be a reason for that. And he was also looking for evidence of the last time fire had burned that area over.
Yes.
So yes, we talked about the possibility of the red being a time when it was wet and there was sort of muddy water coming over it and dropping more of a clay into that sand. It was as I said, I learned a lot, and of course you don't get to take it all in without more thought.
Yes, well, we were going to do. We only were there for a day. It was one day. Essentially, we had a meeting inside, and then we went out into the field. And I would have liked to have come back again, which I never did. But it's a bit of a drive from where we live to the area to spend. It's best time to go is, I suppose, is when the weather is good and when the season has a long bit of light so that you can look at things. So it would be really interesting, the sand dunes and there's some interesting vascular plants that grow there as well that are really specific to those to sand dunes. And I'm sure that there would be some interesting mosses and maybe even liverworts, because liverworts and mosses live in the desert as well. So why not in a sand dunes, a sand barrens?
Well, he started us off down near the little river that winds, and if you look at the satellite image, you can see how many oxbow loops there are in that river, how it's changed course over time.
Mm-hmm.
So we started off going through the woods and basically over a lot of sphagnum, and I saw a couple of really nice colonies of Gaultheria. What is it? The little one, the little tiny leafed one.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I tend to look at the plant material, and he was looking up at the trees to see which particular trees were in this more wet, peaty area.
Yeah. No, Nova Scotia has some really very interesting habitat. I wish I had started thinking about mosses not just 14 years ago, but 20 years ago. I'd be in a lot better. I would have seen a lot more places, and I always take the opportunity when I go to see what's there.
So much to learn in so little time.
Oh, yes. So that's why I say get down there on your hands and knees and take your hand lens and just see what's there, collect it, send it to me if you want to, and I'll identify it.
And
Yes.
is there any evidence of hybridization between certain species in mosses?
Yes, there is. I don't know. I haven't looked at the literature, but I am aware that there is hybridization. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I was just scrolling through the list from the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Center of their mosses and lichens, and all of the SNA labeled ones, meaning they're alien species, are either doubtful or unconfirmed. So
Well, sometimes you just can't tell what you're looking at because it's and more often than not, when I first started to study mosses, the instructor said, whatever you do, don't collect anything that doesn't have sporophytes. And there's a reason for that, because sporophytes will tell you an awful lot. If you dissect the capsule, if you do sections, look at the spores, and just the shape, just the gestalt of the sporophyte. But the problem with that is that a lot of mosses produce sporophytes on this continent. They do in Europe, if they happen to be in both continents, but they don't necessarily have here. And there's one moss, it's my only claim to fame. Francis and Catherine Pross and I spent a couple of years on the Aspatogan Peninsula exploring. And I hadn't been studying mosses very long, so I wasn't particularly good at it. We went in March of 2008 to Rocky Lake. And this was before the area was protected. And there was still ice around the edge. It was the 28th, I think, of March. There was still a wide band of ice that you could walk on. And there are big boulders, huge erratics that are all over the place there. And I was able to get out to this one big boulder. And I thought, oh, well, that's an interesting moss. It looks different from the ones around, but I had no idea what it was. I came back and I had it, and I looked at it again before, and I with the hand lens, and I thought, oh, well, that's a bryum, but I don't know what species it is. So I put it under the microscope. I didn't bother looking for more. I actually went back again and spent half a day there later. But I sent a sample to Bruce Bagnall at University, at New Brunswick, UNB. And he got quite excited, and he said, this moss had no sporophytes. It was just no bigger than your little fingernail. And it just looked different. And he said, you've just collected something that has never been collected in Maritimes before. Oh, really? What is it? Grimmia muehlenbeckii. Well, I was so excited, but when I told the people from Maine, from New Brunswick, I don't know about PEI, in Newfoundland, they said, oh yeah, we have that all over the place. put a pin in my bubble. But one of the reasons when I talked to one of our instructors, he said, well, the reason you don't find them is that a lot of bryologists don't bother with anything that doesn't have sporophytes.
Oh, okay.
They can't be bothered looking at, especially something that's really, really tiny. So I went back and I decided that this had to be, if this is the first time that had been collected, and there were, there's Ireland, who wrote the book on the mosses of Maritimes, and various other authors of papers, and they never found it. This has got to be published. So it's published now. the interesting thing is after I found that I went back to this same spot and I did measurements and took lots and lots of photographs, and I did all the right things, I think. Brought it back and then put it together in a very short paper, and it's published in an online journal in French. It's in English, but it has a French introduction, and it was accepted. So it's recorded in history, which is really nice. And I collected, not collected, I measured 32 specimens that I hadn't seen in March of that year. I went back after the ice had gone. And then I went to Mersey River Chalets. There were clumps on a huge boulder as you're going in on the road. It's on the left. And then I found another one in Hants County it was on granite that had been used and cut for making the culverts or the bridges along the rail line. So it's there too. So I found it in 3 different places, and I waited for several years because I didn't think it wouldn't be a big deal to only find it in one place. It must be found in, so 2 of them are in Lunenburg County and the other one is in Hants County. So I would like to extend that. I'd like to it, and also the other thing is it's on boulders, so it's attached with rhizoids. It's a rock moss.
Wow. So Anne, you've now found it in 3 distinct locations. Is that correct?
Yes.
And now you want to try and find it in other locations across the province.
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I might try up in Cape Breton.
I was just going to say, come on down. We have lots of rocks.
I know, and the habitat is exposed, but not necessarily so. It's usually near where there's a lake, or no, that's not true. That's not true. This was inland. These other 2 were inland. But the moisture, a good setting often is where there's moisture. It's reliable. But they were all exposed, but had periods during the day when there was shade.
For all 3 locations, you said that rocks are an essential. They attach themselves to rocks.
Yes.
So are erratics a necessary ingredient to this mix?
No.
Or could be any? And were these granitic? Were they sandstone?
They were granitic. Yeah, granite.
Lots of granite in Cape Breton.
Yes. Well,
congratulations! What a nice find for you.
Well, it was fun. It sort of makes you realize that you haven't lost your eye for some differences. But I need to get back at it because this summer has been bad for getting out in the field. Not that it wasn't difficult, because with COVID, we have our own woods to go in, but I really needed to go to other woods. So some of the Crown land is always very interesting.
Well, I wish you luck.
Well, is this enough?
That was wonderful.
It's never enough.
You're a wonderful group. That's terrific. That's why I like it. I like the Wildflower Society. Yeah, you have such eclectic tastes and so personable. It's wonderful to go into the field with you all.
I want to.
Well, why don't you come down to Cape Breton and we'll do a Cape Breton meeting.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Once we're able to travel again, that would be lovely.
It would, yes, it
Oh,
would. Yeah.
Charles and I talked about that years ago at a Nature Nova Scotia meeting, of getting down to Cape Breton, but it never materialized. There's always stumbling blocks and obstacles. But maybe one of these days we'll get lucky and meet down here.
Yeah, I love Cape Breton.
Me too.
We need another moss workshop, Anne.
Well, you
Okay.
know, when I saw the picture of the group looking at Buxbaumia aphylla, I got excited, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you have to have someone who is willing to get microscopes for you. You need to
Yeah,
have
it's a lot
dissecting
big.
scopes and compound scopes. It's not an easy thing, easy task.
No. No. Anyway, well, thank you.
Yeah, I want to repeat what Mary said, that it was an ideal presentation, like the mix of the technical and just the observational and just generally your enthusiasm as well about it. It was really an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to all of you.
That was
for coming.
great. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks.
Most interesting. Well, it's getting near my bedtime. So I'm going to say good night and say just how wonderful this was. And thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful moderator, but what would we do without you?
Yes.
And it's so lovely to see everyone, and good flora hunting. Good night, all.
Good night, Beth.
Good night, Bethia. Okay, I guess Charles, think we're done?
I think he's
Okay.
gone.
Yeah, I lost his audio there. Okay,
No, there's
Oh, there he
I
is.
I muted my microphone.
okay,
They give feedback if you leave it on sometimes.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
I'm going to leave here. So thank
Okay,
you
so
all.
Thank you, Anne.
Thanks
And,
again, Ann.
We'll see
Thank you,
you.
Anne.
We'll see you
Great.
in the field sometime.
Okay. Well,
All
then I
right.
will end it
Night.
all here. Goodbye.